I have a logbook that I've counted 122 combat missions. I think, well, I know I have a dozen air medals. These are, things that you're gonna get that stuff. They may buy you a cup of coffee today, And I have two Navy Commendation medals. When I would say perhaps 12 years old, I used to love to make little models. And that's how I developed an interest in airplanes. After school, I applied to go to flight school specifically with the Air Force and the Navy, and I was accepted really by both. So I couldn't believe that, and I thought that's it. Now nothing's going to stop me from getting those wings. The reason I picked the Navy over the Air Force was because two things. One is, I think their uniforms were nicer looking. Now that's really something. But I also knew that Navy pilots landed on carriers. Some of them did, if they flew jets. And so I thought that would be quite a thrill to do that. And that was the main reason I did that. After I was accepted, I went down to Pensacola. That's where it starts. You go through 16 weeks of pre-flight. That means you have to learn military rules and regulations. You have to study map reading and navigation, aerodynamics. It goes on and on and on, and how to be an officer, and how do you march. So you have to learn the basics. That's what it's pre-flight before you fly. Then you go through it's called primary training, which is, they start you off, because I had never been in an airplane as much as I wanted to do it. So that was exciting in that first flight where you're just sitting around there. It's an orientation flight, and a T-34, that's an old Beechcraft, propeller-driven, single engine. But it was fully aerobatic because you had to learn all these things, aerobatics, how to land the airplane, and that type of thing. But on my very first flight, strange things happened. The flight instructor on my first flight was an ex-blimp pilot. The Navy had dirigibles, and they did away with them, so they became instructors. And so on that first flight, I'm just sitting there looking straight ahead, half scared. There was a flare shot off in front of us, and there's a guy down there, it's called the wheels watch. He's looking to see if the gear is down. He did not put his gear down, so there goes the flare, and he was not too happy. I kept my mouth shut then, and I'm sure he got chewed on something else. So then you have to fly your first jet, the T-2J, but it was quite a transition because things happen a lot quicker when you go faster. And if you make it through that, then you go through advanced training. And there you flew actually a fighter that they used prior to that. They were not in the fleet, but they had plenty of them. Yeah, the first time you had to land on the carrier, first you did a lot of practice on the land. Then you go with an instructor, but he gets out of the airplane once he lands the airplane so you can see what it's like. You're just sitting there, but he's no fool. The first time you land a carrier, he gets out of that airplane, and then you get shot off, and then I don't even remember half the things that happened. It's like a dream because it happened so fast, and the next thing you know, you're on board that thing. But I know it looked pretty small when you're looking from the air. When you fly over the end of the carrier to land to catch a wire, you're only about 10 to 15 feet off that deck. That's not too much room if a ship is going up and down. It's a sudden stop. When you touch down, you know right away. It doesn't take long. You add full power so that if the hook skips over a wire or whatever, or breaks, you can go around on that angle. That's why they have an angled deck, so that you're not going to fly into other airplanes parked there. That took about 1.5 years. Then you got your wings, and then they decided where you were going to go. I happened to go out to California, to Lemoore, California, a big jet base there. And I flew an attack airplane. It was called the A4. A stands for attack. But it was a very small airplane, but it carried lots of weapons. There were 5 stations under the bottom of the airplane to hold bombs and rockets and napalm or whatever you needed. And we had 2 20-millimeter cannons. And in fact, I've got this. This is part of that gun that I got hit right there. And I don't know that you can see that, but there's a big dent in this thing. This is very heavy. I think it's titanium. And there's a blast effector, and it's right outside the cockpit, just to blow where you're sitting out there. And it's a good thing that I didn't squeeze that trigger after that, because those were high explosive hits. I don't know what would have happened. It would have blown that thing all up, I guess. But anyway, when I got to the squadron, they were deployed, but they were on their way out to the Western Pacific. So they only got as far as Hawaii. That's where I joined them and continued on out. The name of the carrier that I was on was USS Hancock. It was an old carrier left over from World War II. It was a small aircraft carrier, though. It did the job, but certain airplanes could not land on that carrier. And these cruises, they can be 8 months, they could 7 months, 6 months, it could be 9 months. Okay, life aboard the carrier. I'll tell you a little bit about that. And it's a very coordinated thing, and it's a lot of hard work, especially for the guys that work on the deck. There's one guy that's a volunteer. He has an asbestos suit on, and that's hot inside that thing. But his job is to strictly watch the carrier landings, and if there's a real problem, a crash or whatever, and there are crashes, he goes in there and volunteers to pull that pilot out of that plane. So there's a brave soul. I witnessed a few crashes. It's going to happen. And I know one time I had just landed, and then you pull up to the front of the ship, and they tie you down, and they direct you, and they steer you and all that. And a plane came in there, same type that I had, different squadron, but he got low out there and hit it's called the round down. It's the back end of it's the blunt end of that ship, and it broke in half. And he was still alive, and inside that cockpit slid forward, and then it caught fire, and then the shells began to pop off, and so that guy couldn't go out there and go get him, and he just. But those things, it's going to happen. You don't hear about in the papers too much because you're out in the middle of nowhere,
Swift and sure has been U.S. retaliation for communist PT boat attacks on the high seas. This is the Maddox, one of the 2 destroyers that were attacked while patrolling international waters in the Gulf of Tonkin near North Vietnam.
I think in mid-1965 is when things began to happen. There was a Gulf of Tonkin incident, I think it was called, and it involved high-speed boats coming toward our carriers and our fleet. And even prior to that a little bit, which McNamara didn't want us to tell anybody at the time, but we were bombing over there in Laos before people in the U.S. knew about that. And so when it started, that's when we now started to have missions in North Vietnam, and then sometimes we would be in South Vietnam. Sometimes it would be a 4-plane gaggle. Sometimes it could be 16, it could be more than that if it's major stuff. When you get on the target, it's very busy. The radio frequency, if somebody's always talking or so, because you're very busy. You have to follow the person that's in front of you. We're in a circling the target. So we go in at like 100 feet above the decks to avoid radar, but then when you're going to go on a bombing mission, you have to climb up to 7,000 feet. Why do you do that? Because you have to be perfectly straight coming down at that target. Not like today. There was no GPS. There was no smart weapons back then. You had to they don't see the target today. That's the 30 seconds you owe your country. Not the rest of the time you're jinxing. You're moving around to avoid getting shot at, or that kind of thing. You're busy, you're watching the target, and one time I was just paying attention to the target, switching bomb racks and whatever. And I saw these tracers coming from behind me. It looked like it was right near my canopy. I look in the mirror, there's a MiG right there. But I could outturn the MiG. It was a very maneuverable airplane. So I've been hit quite a few times. I was making a bomb run one time, and when you come over the target, after you climbed up to 7,000 feet, and the target's there, you roll upside down. Because if you just push straight over, you're pulling negative G's. You're going to float like that. So you upside down, and you come down there like this, and then roll it again. And I was just upside down when, boom, I had a shell, or lead, or whatever, come right in front of my windshield. And it was still on the outside of the airplane, but it went right between my legs. So that was that was scary, and it destroyed the radar and that kind of stuff. And then sometimes we worked in South Vietnam with forward air controllers. They would have an Air Force pilot in a light airplane, or the Army, maybe the Army guys. And I remember in one incident, they called us in, and some of our guys were surrounded, and so we just happened to be carrying napalm that day, and that's wicked stuff, you know. And I can show you the paperwork on that. It was not good. You could see the people running across this clearing, you know, and you're pickling that thing and they're all gone, just like that. Yeah, that's not fun. Things that bothered me was when we were done bombing, we would usually have 20 millimeter bullets left, shell, and we would take targets of opportunity. Now, what does that mean? Well, I didn't necessarily agree with this, but it's what you got to do. Sometimes we would see their water buffalo and strafe them, because they depend on those animals. Or sometimes there would be fishing boats out there off the coast, because we're going back to the carrier after we're done. And these boats, and I don't know who's aboard these boats, but we just strafed them. And I often wondered about that, you know. On one mission in the north, we were bombing a radar station, because some of these missiles that they fired at us, like a SAM, surface-to-air missile, they were guided by this radar set, or they were beam riders. They rode a beam. And so we were doing, in fact, my roommate, he was right in front of me. We would take turns suppressing the flak, because you know they're firing at you, and if they're not firing at you, then there's something wrong. They got MiGs coming. That's what that means. So he was right in front of me, and I could see the tracers coming back at us, and he never pulled out. And the strange thing about that little story is, my roommate told me that morning, he said, "Art, I'm not coming back." I said, "You're full of poop. You know, Gary, don't talk like that, you know." And he never came back. My commanding officer, he got shot down. He was a prisoner, but he had been injured. They never gave him any medical help. He died of dysentery in a cell in the corner. That's what he did. In the Navy squadron, there are about 17 pilots. It's a bond between the pilots that will never go away. I do believe the relationship I had with other people, and also the experiences I went through, made a better person of me. And I appreciate more things now than I would ever think about in the past. Let me tell you about what I was thinking about, what went through my mind as I'm sitting there on that catapult about to get thrust off there. You're scared, because I know I just was there yesterday, and I know what it's going to be like, you know, and then some people don't come back. So that has to go, it goes through your mind. I left the ship in July of '66, and it was still there in the war zone. In fact, my commanding officer said to me, "Art, if you fly one more mission, it'll be the new month. See, we got $50 a month. That was the pay for combat. Oh yeah. And so I thought, well, he said, I'll get you your $50. And I turned it down. I said, no, I'm leaving. Because that would be the time where you get it, you know. I was making about $800 a month at the time. But that was then. When I was released from the Navy, I knew I had to find a job. I had a wife and no kids yet. So I applied for different airlines, and then I got a call from American Airlines. So I had to go out to Los Angeles to an interview, and they hired me, but I had to wait for 6 or 8 weeks before I could get a class date. Because they wanted to interview me, take all their physicals and all that stuff. And one thing that bothered me about that, you know, we're treated pretty good today. I mean, that's why I wear my hat. People say thank you, and it's unbelievable. And it makes me feel pretty good, because when I wasn't like it was back then when I got out. And even my own uncle, I'll never forget that, he chastised me for taking unemployment check for 6 weeks. And I thought, you have no idea what I just went through. Because I had 6 or 8 weeks off. What I wanted to do, I had to be alone. I felt that I got to get rid of some of this stuff in my head. So my uncle, another uncle up in Michigan, had a cabin on Lake Huron, and he let me and my wife go there for a couple of weeks. But every day I went out fishing in a boat, just to clear myself, and I'm glad I had that time to do that. I'm certainly no hero, and I'm not brave, but I did it because other people were doing it, and I really felt that I'm a patriot. And I have thought about this, about what our forefathers have done for us. They've sacrificed their life and the whole thing for the freedoms that we have. You know, we live in the best country in the world, as far as I'm concerned. People don't understand that unless you've seen how other people have to live in the world. And so I feel we have to do that, you know, if we want to have the good life that we have. I think I've been a very blessed guy. And I mean that, because I never dreamed that I could have the good life that I have. And I have to thank the military, did an awful lot for me. And I'm so happy. I don't think I would change a thing in my life. I had that.